Well, thank you so much for that song, and it's great to be here in McDonough, Georgia. Charles Thomas and I have been friends for many years. I love his wife, Leslie, more than I love him. His children, I've got to watch grow up for a few years close up, but now from afar, and I am just so pleased and honored that he would have me here to share with you this weekend. We've had a great weekend. We really have. God has given you guys a wonderful opportunity by bringing you this new campus. We were one of the first churches at First Baptist Windermere to be in the multi-campus movement. And we made a fundamental decision that we wanted to reproduce the DNA that made our church so healthy in other congregations. And that's what we chose to do, and God was honored by that, and those churches are still going strong today. I want to share with you something. Now, I'm from West Virginia, and so you'll have to bear with me with my sense of humor for just a couple minutes. But here's some puns I want to share with you this morning, and you can use these at work tomorrow. They're free. Male deer have buck teeth. The man who survived mustard gas and pepper spray is now a seasoned veteran. The man who fell into an upholstery machine is fully recovered. I thought I saw an eye doctor on an Alaskan island, but it turned out to be an optical illusion. Pretty bad, right? I think they're going to get a little bit better here. She was only a whiskey maker, but he loved her still. When two egotists meet, it's an eye for an eye. Corduroy pillows are making headlines. Did you? Corduroy, Chuck, he got that. Yeah, good. Glad somebody did, yeah. Two silkworms had a race. They ended up in a tie. And finally, an invisible man married an invisible woman. The kids were nothing to look at either. Now look, in the Old Testament, we're going to spend most of our time this morning in Numbers chapter 14 and Joshua chapter 14. I want us to think about our legacy this morning, the kind of legacy that you and I are going to leave. Now, I'm of the opinion, and it's been my experience and my observation, that many people are concerned about making a legacy. But I don't think we make a legacy. I think we're going to leave a legacy. Think for a minute about this. Does anybody know what this is? What is this? Anybody know? It's a relay baton. Now, I remember watching in 2008 the Summer Olympics in Beijing, China. The Jamaican men and the Jamaican women were favored to win the 400 by 100 gold medal in the relay. The Americans were favored to win the silver medal in both races, the men's and the women's. But do you know what happened in both the men's and the women's heats? As they ran the race, the first race, they both dropped the baton. And they were disqualified. Some of the fastest people in the world couldn't do something as simple as hand the baton to someone else. And because of it, they were disqualified. And in many ways, all of us in this room this morning have a baton. Doesn't matter how old we are. But our lives are going to be a baton that we're going to pass on to somebody else. And the thing that we don't want to do is to drop the baton and fail to pass on the legacy that God is building into our lives. But we do it so many times. Several years ago, a study was done among senior adults who were in nursing homes, rehabilitation facilities, assisted living centers, and these senior adults were 90 years old and above. And the question was asked, if you had your life to live over again, what would you do differently? The top 3 responses. Number 1, we'd take more risks. Number 2, we would invest more in relationships. And number 3, we would give ourselves to things that would live on long after we are gone. Isn't that great wisdom? I mean, their lives for all practical purposes were over. They're 90 and above. But those of us this morning, we still have a chance, don't we? What's your legacy going to be? What's my legacy going to be? Numbers chapter 14 is the story of a sad period in the life of Israel. Moses had led the children of Israel out of captivity from Egypt. They had passed through the Sinai Peninsula, and you read that story, pardon me, in the book of Exodus, in the book of Numbers, and in the book of Leviticus. They had been given the law. They were on their way to the land that God had promised to Abraham hundreds of years earlier. At Kadesh Barnea, Moses chose 12 men, one from each tribe, to go and to explore the land that God had promised to give them. You remember the story. They went into the land. For 40 days, they explored the land. They came back, and Moses said, guys, tell us how it was. And we read the story in verse 16 of Numbers chapter 14. The report came. Well, let me stop. Let's go back to verse 26 of chapter 13 to set the context. Then they came back to Moses and Aaron, and the whole Israelite community at Kadesh assembled. They reported to them and to the whole assembly and showed them the fruit of the land. They gave Moses this account: we went into the land to which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey. Here's the fruit. Now listen, but the people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. We even saw some descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites live in the Negev. The Hittites, the Jebusites, the Amorites live in the hill country, and the Canaanites live near the sea along the Jordan. Then Caleb silenced the people before them and said, we should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it. But the men who had gone up with him said, we can't attack these people. They're stronger than we are. And they spread among the Israelites a bad report about the land they had explored. Now Caleb has become one of my heroes. Because Caleb and Joshua, among the 12 alone, said, let's go take this land. But the other 10 came back and said, so we can't do this. There are too many people. They're bigger than we are. And there was a rebellion. And the Bible says that as the people rebelled, as the people turned against the leadership, Moses and Aaron, that only two had the courage to speak out. But Moses and Aaron fell face down in front of the whole assembly. Gathered there Joshua son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, who among them had left to go to explore the land. The land we possessed or passed through and explored is exceedingly good. If the Lord is pleased with us, He will lead us into the land of milk and honey, and He will give it to us. Now, that's Caleb speaking. Listen, the first quality and the first thing we've got to come to terms with, if we're going to leave a godly legacy for the people in our lives, is the whole issue of courage. Because we're going to have so many other people telling us how we need to live our lives that we're constantly going to be forced to choose how it is we choose to live our lives. Don't you agree with that? If you don't have a center, if you don't have a core, there's constant forces trying to pull you in their direction. You know, I remember my church, anytime we tried to do something, people would come to me and say, Pastor, a lot of people are talking. And I learned pretty quickly that anytime said a lot of people are talking or some people are saying, that it wasn't a lot of people or some people, it was simply them. And I would always say, well, tell me who they are, because I want to talk to them as well. I'm serious. Courage is the opposite of fear. And you know, sometimes it's tough in life, isn't it? I mean, fear is just one of those emotions that can paralyze us. Fear is one of those emotions that can keep us from experiencing the best that God has for us. The Israelites rebelled. They took a vote, 10-2, and God lost. And the people turned against Moses, they turned against Aaron, and God said, fine. Fine. You don't want my best for you. You don't want the land flowing with milk and honey. You can wander in the desert for the next 40 years. And that's exactly what happened. And you remember that no one over the age of 20 was allowed to go into the promised land. That all those 20 and older during that 40-year period died in the desert wandering. But God's a gracious God. God's a merciful God. Moses prayed, God, would you forgive these Israelites for what they did? God said, Moses, I'll forgive them. They're forgiven, but they will not experience the best I have for them. I think that's a word for each of us, isn't it? Sometimes we can miss God's best if we're not careful. Sometimes it takes courage to step out on faith and to do something new, or to allow God to use us in a way we haven't thought of being used. Sometimes it's true as a church. I think it's incredible. Like I told you earlier, God brought you another campus. He thought you were worthy. He thought you were stewards. He believed you could handle this thing. That's new. That can be scary. Sure it is. But it takes courage to say yes to God. And you said yes. There's another quality that we need to keep in mind if we're going to leave a legacy that's going to honor God. It's found in chapter 14, verse 24, and it's written about Caleb. And this is what God said about Caleb. Because my servant Caleb, listen to what it says now, has a different spirit and follows me wholeheartedly, I will bring him into the land he went to, and his descendants will inherit it. God said that Caleb had a different spirit. And he was devoted wholeheartedly to God. Now, for the Hebrew, the heart meant the center of a person's being. Not just the physical organ that pumps blood, but the will, the emotion, the mind, the soul. We could use the word integrity, because the word integrity means a whole person. Those of you that are good with math, an integer is what? It's a whole number, right? A person of integrity is a whole person. Their body, their soul, their spirit, their emotions, they all line up. Caleb was wholehearted. And he lived that way. He wasn't one person here and another person there. He didn't say one thing to this person and go say something else to this person. He was a wholehearted person because he had made the decision at some point in his life that that's who he was going to be, and he was going to serve God with all his heart. And it was God saying that about Caleb, not Caleb saying that about himself. Let me ask you a question this morning. What would God say about you? How is our heart this morning? It's the beginning of a new year. It's time we can take inventory, can't we? We should. I do every year. I set goals of what I want to do every year in my life and with my company. I want those things to align. I don't just want to do what Mark wants to do. I want to do what God wants Mark to do. That's legacy. Because God works in ways I don't understand. He knows the future. I need to plan for the future, but there's no guarantee of the future, is there? Caleb lived wholehearted. He was a person of integrity in every area of his life. There's another quality that is so important if we're going to be a person that leaves a legacy, a person that makes a difference, a person that makes an impact that will live on after we're gone. And it's the quality of humility. Throughout the Old Testament, we know that it was God that chose leaders. You know, there were times that the Israelites tried to appoint themselves leader and always met with difficult, adverse, and terrible consequences for themselves and the country. In fact, you remember the story, after God told the Israelites they would wander in the desert for 40 years, some of the Israelites got the idea, no, we'll go ahead and take this land now. And they got their own army together, and they set off to take the country, the promised land, and they were defeated and routed because the Bible says God was not with them. And folks, I don't want to go anywhere God's not, do you? We don't have to. But there's something about Caleb that we see in his life, and if we're not careful, we'll miss it. Deuteronomy chapter 1, verses 34 through 37. Let me read it to you. When the Lord heard this, what you said, and this is Moses telling the story, reminding the people of what happened. Because remember now, a generation was passing, and a generation was gone, and Moses was trying to tell the new generation who would go into the promised land what had happened. Not an evil man of this generation shall see the good land I swore to give you, except your fathers, except Caleb the son of Jephunneh. He will see it, and I will give him and his descendants the land, because he followed the Lord wholeheartedly. Now, it's Moses that's calling Caleb wholehearted. But who was the leader, the heir apparent to Moses? It was Joshua, wasn't it? I mean, you read the Old Testament, there's no book of Caleb. There's the book of Joshua. See, I think Caleb had tremendous humility and demonstrated his entire life because Caleb was content to play second place. He was content to be the backup quarterback. He understood his role, he knew his role, he accepted his role, and he executed his role with integrity, wholeheartedness, faithfulness, and integrity. Joshua was God's appointed leader. It was Joshua who went up the mountain with Moses when Moses received the 10 Commandments and the law, not Caleb. It was Joshua who would take the place of Moses to lead the Israelites into the promised land, not Caleb. But Caleb was there every step of the way, and he had Joshua's back. He was there to serve the Lord, but as he served the Lord, he served Joshua. Listen, there are God-appointed leaders. And we want to do everything we can in humility to follow God's appointed leaders. There are situations in life where we know that we have a boss, and we need to follow our boss if we want to keep our job. There's God's authority and there's God's plan for the home and life. We need to follow that. We need to follow God's plan. Sometimes our culture tells us something different. But it's that sense of humility. And the word humility in the Bible means to place oneself under. Paul wrote to the church at Philippi, in humility, consider others better than yourselves. You say, wait a minute. You mean I don't need to care about myself? No, that's not what he's saying. But certainly all of us could afford to care about ourselves a little less and others more, couldn't we? If we're going to leave a legacy, we have to do so with a sense of humility, with a sense of courage, and with a sense of being wholehearted. There's another quality, and I love this. Joshua chapter 14. Moses had long since died. The conquest of the promised land was underway, almost complete. And in Joshua chapter 14, Caleb speaks. Verse 10. And this is Joshua. Now then, just as the Lord promised, he has kept me alive for 45 years since the time he said this to Moses while Israel moved about in the desert. Well, listen. So here I am today, 85 years old. I am still as strong today as the day Moses sent me out. I'm just as vigorous to go out to battle as I was then. Now give me this hill country that the Lord promised me. You yourself heard that the Amalekites were there and their cities were large and fortified, but the Lord is helping me. I will drive them out just as he said they would. At 85 years old, this guy is still ready to go to battle with God. Think about that. 85. 40 years earlier at 45. Yeah, well, I can understand that, but, he probably should have retired. But Caleb said, no, I'm just as faithful today. Because, see, he knew God was just as faithful to him at 85 as he was at 45. Now, folks, I've learned some things through the years. I'm 57 years old. And listen, if we're a person of integrity at 85, odds are we were a person of integrity at 45. And listen, if we're an idiot at 45, we're probably going to be an idiot at 85. I've just learned that. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to offend anybody, but that's just life. You know what God needs today? He doesn't need more men trying to be dudes and girls trying to be divas. He needs men trying to be godly women, women trying to be godly women. That's what God needs, and that's what God wants. And that's what's going to enable us to leave a legacy. But we have to choose who we're going to follow. We're going to have to make some choices. Do we want God's best? Or are we content to do things our way? And what everyone else tells us to do, and what our culture and what our friends tell us to do, that's a choice we're going to constantly make every day. I just know the choice that Caleb made. Legacy. What kind of legacy are you going to leave to your spouse and to your kids and to your grandkids and your great-grandkids? What kind of legacy are you going to leave to the community of McDonough? What kind of legacy are you going to leave to the family here at First Baptist Church, McDonough? One of the greatest football games, if not the greatest football game today, NFC Championship, right? Go Falcons. 1958, New York Giants and the Baltimore Colts, called the greatest game in NFL history. I'd like to say I watched it. I didn't. Even if I did, I don't remember. I was probably fighting with my brothers. I was only 3 years old. But the 1958 New York Giants was perhaps one of the greatest teams ever. One of the greatest games ever. 7 Hall of Fame players for the Colts, 8 Hall of Fame players for the Giants, 2 Hall of Fame coaches. From 1954 to 1958, do you know who the defensive coordinator was for the New York Giants? Tom Landry. From 1954 to 1958, do you know who the offensive coordinator was for the New York Giants? Vince Lombardi. And after that game, Lombardi left to go coach the Packers, and Landry coached 1 more year and left to go coach and start the Cowboys. What a legacy. Think of how many Hall of Fame players have emerged from those 2 organizations. How many Super Bowls from those 2 organizations. How many head coaches from those 2 organizations. Now, is there anyone in this room this morning that knows the head coach of the New York Giants from 1954 to 1958? Probably not. His name was Jimmy Lee Howe. But what about his legacy? He has a great legacy, doesn't it? Because, see, he had the courage and the guts and the intelligence to hire these 2 smart, capable coaches. He wasn't threatened by them. He hired them and let him lead and let him influence. Took courage, but he did. Nobody remembers Jimmy Lee Howe. Everybody knows Tom Landry, and everybody knows Vince Lombardi. 1930s, there was an attorney in St. Louis. His name was E.J. O'Hare. He was called Easy Eddie. He and his wife divorced, and Easy Eddie decided to move to Chicago. While he was in Chicago, he came in touch and started doing business with a gangster named Al Capone. And Easy Eddie and Al Capone became a part of a mob group that really dominated and ran the city of Chicago. But Eddie O'Hare had a conscience. And he realized what he was doing was wrong. And he wanted his son to have a different legacy. And so Eddie O'Hare became an informant to the IRS. And Al Capone, you remember, was arrested, charged, and imprisoned for tax evasion, largely due to the testimony of Eddie O'Hare. Eddie O'Hare was gunned down by assassins in 1939 while driving his car in Chicago. But that's not the end of the story. His son, Butch O'Hare, went to the United States Naval Academy, graduated as a pilot, flew in World War II in the Pacific Theater. In 1942, because of his heroism in combat, he was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor. In 1943, he was killed by friendly fire. But his legacy doesn't stop there. See, because if you go to Chicago, what airport do you land at today? O'Hare Field. And between Terminal 1 and Terminal 2, there's a statue of Eddie Butch O'Hare Jr. Because a father decided to leave a different legacy for his son, history was different. Folks, we're all going to leave a legacy. We just have to decide what legacy we're going to leave. And sometimes we don't have a choice. Sometimes God's plan is different than our plans, isn't it? July 5th, my wife and I were on our back porch talking. We're talking about the next 25 years. We're talking about kids and our grandkids, and we were talking about doing ministry together. My wife was back home after 18 months of being in North Carolina with her mother who had Alzheimer's, helping her father care for her mother. During those 18 months, Carla and I had gone through a kind of a difficult time. After 25 years of being a pastor, I was suffering from burnout and all the things that come with that, a chemical imbalance that was diagnosed in my life. And you know, we had some rocky times, but we decided at my son's wedding in December of 2011 that we were going to make it go. And we did. Her mother died May 11th of Alzheimer's, complication from Alzheimer's, and Carla moved back full-time to live with me in Florida the last week in May. She said, "Mark, I'm so glad to be home." Thursday night. So glad to be home. That morning, the next morning, we launched my company's website. That night, we were on our way to Seasons 52 in Orlando to have dinner with good friends. And as we drove, a minivan crossed the center line and hit our car head on. The airbags went off, the car turned over. All I could think about was getting us out of the car. I unbuckled Carla's seatbelt, I unbuckled my seatbelt. I was pleading with the people, just get us out. I was afraid the car was going to catch on fire. And the last memory on this earth I have of my wife is me holding her in my arms until they took me out of the car, out of the back window, to the hospital emergency room where I had critical life-threatening injuries. She was pronounced dead at the scene. Now, legacy. My wife and I decided that after 35 years of marriage, we wanted to leave a legacy to our son and daughter and to our daughter-in-law and to our grandkids that we would make a marriage work. That God could heal and God could restore and God could sustain us through whatever, that there wasn't any difference too big that we couldn't reconcile, and we were doing that and did that. I wanted to leave a legacy to the 600 plus couples I had performed wedding ceremonies through 25 years of ministry. I wanted to leave a legacy to a church family there in Windermere, that God could heal and God could restore and God could renew. Has it been hard? Yeah, it's been hard. 13 major injuries. ICU for a week and General Hospital for another week and rehabilitation and just now getting back. But in the midst of that, folks, God taught me and continues to teach me that the book of James tells us that our life is just a mist. We just got a little bit of time. What are we going to do with that little bit of time? The Bible tells us that life is about people and relationships and the people we're close to. And how are we treating the people we're close to? How are we treating the people we're sitting here with this morning? Or the people who aren't sitting here and should be sitting here and could be sitting here if we would just reach out in reconciliation and offer forgiveness and receive forgiveness? A mist. Just a little bit. You say, well, Mark, next year I'm going to get serious with God. Really? Do you have a guarantee of next year? And let me ask you this. What makes you sure next year you're going to even want to get serious with God? Listen, the only guarantee any one of us has is today. Now. That's it. And my challenge to you this morning and my encouragement to you this morning is to be serious with God in wholehearted devotion and courage, in humility and in faithfulness. Doesn't matter how old we are. Last memory that I chose and choose to have of Carlton Chapel, my father-in-law, and Carol, my mother-in-law, who died of Alzheimer's, is they led a capital stewardship campaign at Wake Forest Baptist Church at the age of 75, and they stood and they led that church to give money for a new site that the church had purchased and wanted to develop to reach young people. My mother's 87 years old. I love my mother. She just bought an iPhone and a new Lexus. She did. But you know what I love most about her right now? She's more involved in her church today than she ever has been. We went out last year and shot for a new Bible for her. She was asked to lead a session in her Bible study. And she wasn't sure, and I helped her write an outline on how to lead a Bible study. She's there every Sunday for worship and Sunday school. She volunteers in the kitchen once every 6 weeks. She makes sure every newspaper, and this woman reads the Wall Street Journal and the Village Times every day, that we take those up to the recycling bin at her church because that's her church. 87. Does she like everything about the church? No. Sometimes she complains and says, Mark, I said, Mom. I go, I can do that to my mother. I go, I said, Mom, remember I was a pastor, and pastors don't need criticism. They need support. She said, well, they're building this new worship center, and I'm not sure we need this new worship center. Mom. And what does my mom do? She strokes a huge check and gives it to the church for the worship center because she wants to be a part of what God is doing. I said, Mom, that's my inheritance. What are you doing? No. She just wants to be a part of something that's alive and something that's growing. That's legacy. And that honors God. Folks are all at different places in our relationship with God. I know we are. If you're here today and you don't have a relationship with God through Jesus Christ, don't put making that decision off. There's no guarantee of tomorrow. And even if there is, I promise, some of you think you'll have the opportunity and you won't because you won't care. Some of us this morning are here and there's a relationship where reconciliation needs to take place. Don't put that off. Some of us are here this morning and we've gone through a tragedy. And we're trying to figure out what's going on. You know, I know. And I don't have all the answers, but one of the girls of one of my clients asked me, she said, well, Mark, how is this, what has this done to your face? I bet it's hurt your faith. And I looked at her and said, Arlen, it hadn't hurt my faith, it strengthened my faith. I don't know what other answer there is. Years ago, I read a book about Job called Disappointed with God. The whole premise of that book is there are going to be disappointments in life, with or without God. And I'd rather be disappointed with God than disappointed without God, because He can make sense out of the things I can't possibly begin to fathom. Every day. My kids, my father-in-law, his family, my family, we've determined that we're not going to live in the past. We're going to grieve, and we know that Carol and Carla are in heaven. We'll see them again one day. But we're going to live every day to the fullest with God. Is it hard? Yeah, it's hard. Some days it's courage. Some days I just feel like sitting in the chair. But then I realize all those people that are driving to work, going past my house in the car, they're not putting their life on hold. Why in the world would God want me to put mine on hold? He doesn't. He wants me to live for Him. He wants you to live for Him. He wants us to live for Him. He wants us to make a difference and leave a legacy. What's yours going to be this morning? God bless you. Thank you so much for allowing me to share with you this morning. Pastor.
This has been a video production of the First Baptist Church of McDonough, Georgia, recorded at our downtown campus at 101 Macon Street, McDonough, Georgia. We would love to have you join us at our downtown campus or at our west campus at 2167 Jonesboro Road. If you have any questions, please contact the church office at 770-957-5828.